My name is Emerson Vale. I'm 37 years old, and I'm a senior director at the Department of Defense, specializing in systems integration and cybersecurity. Tomorrow I'll walk into a boardroom at Westwind Defense Systems and quietly dismantle every assumption my family has ever made about me. They don't know I'll be there. They don't know I'm the final sign-off on their biggest contract in company history. Last night, over dry roast and stilted conversation, my father asked if I was still in tech. My brother smirked and offered me a half-hearted, "You're doing good for yourself," before launching into a speech about his latest leadership role. No one asked what I actually did. No one's asked in years. I'm still, in their eyes, the daughter who drifted. The one who never climbed. The one who didn't matter. But tomorrow, when Lorraine Marsh, the CEO, greets me as Director Vale in front of the entire executive suite, the room will freeze. And my father will finally learn what it means to build something without his approval. Tonight, I sit alone in the guest room of the house I grew up in, letting silence anchor me. My badge is in my suitcase. My presentation deck is already uploaded. And my resolve, sharpened. Let them keep their illusions a little longer. Let them think they're the ones who've made it. Tomorrow, they'll learn whose name actually signs the clearance reports. Tomorrow, they'll address me the way they never did when it mattered. By title, with silence. And maybe, if they can manage it, respect. The driveway felt narrower than I remembered. My old Camry used to glide right in, but the government-issued black SUV I drove now looked out of place, like it belonged to someone important. Which, ironically, it did. I eased it between my mother's aging minivan and my brother's Tesla, parked with the confidence of someone who never had to question their place. The porch light was already on. Same yellow glow, same chipped brick steps, same faded mat that still read "Welcome" like it hadn't been stepped on for a decade. I paused at the bottom, hand on the railing. For a moment, I wasn't a Department of Defense director. I was a daughter again, one who'd learned to carry silence like armor. I rang the bell. Old habit. "It's open." My mother's voice floated from the kitchen. She didn't come to greet me. Of course not. I stepped inside and was immediately hit with the smell of rosemary and starch. Roast beef again. The hallway was still lined with framed milestones, each more predictable than the last. Logan's college graduation, Logan's wedding, Logan and Marissa with their kids at some expensive beach. Not one photo of me. Not even the one I'd mailed after my first federal commendation. "Dinner's almost ready," my mother said, stirring something on the stove without looking up. "Logan and Marissa should be here any minute. You're just in time." I hung my coat on the back of the same dining room chair I always ended up in. Not assigned, never spoken, but known, like I was always just one layer removed from mattering. "That's great," I said flatly. "Long drive." My mother glanced up for the first time. "You're still based out of San Antonio?" I paused. "No. I transferred to D.C. last year." "Oh," she said, blinking. "Well, Logan's team just got handed the systems development piece for that big contract. Defense something or other. Everyone at the office says he's really moving up. You'll have to congratulate him." I didn't answer. That contract was on my desk just last week. The table was set for 6. There was no card with my name, but the layout was always the same. Logan at the head, Dad on the right, Mom between them, and me at the edge. Close enough to witness, far enough to dismiss. Logan and Marissa arrived right on time, because of course they did. He wore a blazer the color of confidence, and a grin that said he had stories to tell. She carried a bottle of wine with too many syllables in its name. "Jules," Logan said, hugging me like we'd bumped into each other at a train station. "It's been, what?" 7 years, I replied. He laughed awkwardly, clearly unsure if I was joking. I wasn't. We sat, we passed plates, we performed. Logan talked about cross-functional teams and scalability as if we hadn't both grown up watching Jeopardy on a couch with duct tape on the armrest. Dad nodded along like every word deserved a round of applause. Marissa chimed in just enough to remind us she understood strategy too. My mother beamed like her legacy was unfolding in real time. "And you?" my mother asked, turning to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Still working in tech? More or less, I said, sipping water. Still at that contractor place? Dad asked, eyes not leaving his fork. I moved agencies. Oh. He cut his meat with unnecessary precision. Still just consulting, or have you found something more stable? I held his gaze for a beat too long. Pretty stable. Logan smirked. Must be tough, bouncing between assignments like that. I mean, I like having a long-term path, you know? Strategic vision. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because the strategy he spoke so proudly of, it was about to be evaluated by me. After dinner, I retreated to my childhood room. The air was still faintly scented with lavender, a leftover trace from the drawer sachets my grandmother used to send. The quilt on the bed was the same, sewn from old t-shirts and scraps of my 8th grade volleyball uniform. The walls were lined with ghosts, my National Honor Society certificate, my acceptance letter to Stanford, my first science fair ribbon, but nothing beyond 18. As if my life had paused the second I declined my father's offer to intern at Westwin and joined ROTC instead. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the past press in. I remembered the exact words my father said when I told him I'd accepted the government scholarship. The military is a detour, not a destination. You're too smart to waste your time marching in line. I had smiled then, too proud to let his words pierce me. But they had. They always did. That summer, I moved out. I went through boot camp. I finished my dual degrees and specialized in systems analysis. I rose through the ranks, not in uniform, but through silent halls of policy meetings, encryption audits, and national threat briefings. I wasn't someone's assistant. I was the person who signed the compliance orders, who carried the federal clearance stamp. And every time I emailed home with news, promotion announcements, published papers, keynote addresses, no one replied. Not once. I stopped sending them after year 4. They made their choice. Logan was the legacy. I was the deviation. Downstairs, I heard laughter. Dad's deep chuckle, Logan's confident boom, Mom's soft agreement. A symphony of belonging I hadn't been invited to in years. It used to sting. Now it just echoed. My phone vibrated. A reminder. Westwin Boardroom 0900. Bring revised draft recommendations and oversight brief. I looked at the manila folder on my nightstand. Inside, updated compliance assessments, flagged protocol conflicts, and a printout of Logan's own presentation. He didn't know it yet, but his team had failed one of the primary DoD resilience thresholds. A blind spot in the system's integration logic, one I'd caught in 15 minutes. Tomorrow, I'd walk into his building, not as his sister, not as someone with potential, but as the official who could stall or greenlight $700 million in funding. I opened the zipper on my overnight bag and pulled out my clearance badge. Federal seal, gold-etched. Vale, EIE, it read. Senior, Dear, Cyber Ops, DoD authorized. I clipped it to the inside of my coat and laid it neatly across the chair. Then I turned off the light. Let them think I'm still drifting. Let them sleep peacefully under the illusion that I missed the train. Tomorrow, they'll realize I built the tracks. Morning came in quiet layers. First, the creak of old pipes, then the hum of a coffee maker downstairs. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house stir around me like it hadn't in years. Everything felt small, compressed. The walls, the air, even the version of me they remembered. I got dressed without sound. Tailored slacks, a navy blouse, low heels, professional, purposeful, civilian enough not to raise flags, but distinct enough that anyone in the know would notice the gold badge clipped inside my coat. I passed my father in the hallway on my way out. He didn't look up from the newspaper. Meeting someone for breakfast? He asked. Something like that, I replied. He grunted. Don't be late. Logan's presenting to Marsh today. It's a big deal. I nodded once. I know. Outside, the cold bit sharp at the edges of my sleeves. I slid into the SUV, locked the doors, and allowed myself one breath. Controlled, deep, practiced. Then I keyed in the destination. Westwin Defense Headquarters. just 40 minutes out. Every turn of the road felt like a tightening coil, not of nerves, but memory. Westwin had always been his domain. My father had built a reputation there, shaping departments, mentoring the next generation. Logan had been born into that narrative. I'd been written out of it the second I chose a different font. I remembered the first time I saw my name printed on a Pentagon memo. E. Vale, Clearance Tier 4, Strategic Protocol Lead. I'd stood in that gray conference room in Arlington, wearing flats that pinched and a suit that didn't quite fit, thinking this should mean something. But there were no phone calls, no proud messages, just silence. In the early years, I told myself they were busy, that maybe the emails got lost, that maybe they didn't understand the significance. But I had sent links, articles, transcripts. They didn't miss it. They just didn't care to understand. Recognition became irrelevant. I learned to operate in the shadows. I briefed admirals on cyber vulnerabilities. I authored protocols used in defense satellites. I sat in situation rooms where names weren't shared and titles were spoken softly. Still, there were moments I hoped. Like the time I received the National Cyber Shield Commendation. I had scanned the small audience 3 times, hoping to see familiar faces. None came. I'd walked off that stage with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Back then, I thought maybe if I just did more, climbed higher, they would eventually see me. But that kind of validation is a moving target. And I stopped chasing it the day I found a printed copy of Logan's high school basketball stats in the family junk drawer, right next to a letter I'd written from overseas. Unopened. That was the day I decided to stop mailing pieces of my life home like souvenirs. They didn't want the postcards. They only wanted the picture that made sense to them. At the Westwin campus, security was tighter than I remembered. The gate scanned my plate, then my badge. The guard stepped back quickly and gave a crisp nod. "Director Vale, welcome!" That greeting, so simple, felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the title, but because I had never heard anything like it inside my own home. I parked in the reserved section labeled Government Liaisons and adjusted my coat. No hesitation, no theatrics. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for oversight. Still, I couldn't help but feel the irony pulse beneath my skin. Logan would be presenting today as lead on the systems integration team for the exact contract I'd been auditing for the past 2 months. Project Sentry, a multi-tiered defense initiative aimed at securing command communication infrastructure. High profile, high pressure, and completely dependent on passing cybersecurity evaluation benchmarks. Benchmarks I had authored. I stepped into the lobby just as the executive elevator opened across the floor. The click of my heels echoed with unfamiliar command. A few junior staff looked up, blinking. Some recognized the badge, others just straightened their postures instinctively. "Good morning," I offered. "Ma'am," one replied quickly, eyes wide. I nodded and pressed the elevator button. On the way up, I reviewed my mental checklist. I'd already reviewed their draft reports, cross-referenced source code, verified redundancy plans. I knew where the weaknesses were. The only unknown now was how they'd react when they realized the person who had final approval wasn't a disconnected bureaucrat, but the ghost of the family they'd buried in politeness and neglect. The elevator chimed. When the doors slid open, I was greeted with silence, then footsteps. Logan. He was facing the opposite direction, flipping through a glossy presentation binder. His posture was casual, confident. Then he turned. At first, he didn't register me. His eyes scanned, confused by the context. Then confusion gave way to disbelief. Why are you— Wait, what is that badge? I didn't stop walking. "Morning, Mr. Vale. I'm here for the project review." He blinked. "You're— what?" Before he could formulate anything more coherent, another voice entered the hallway. "Director Vale!" Lorraine Marsh appeared from around the corner, flanked by 2 advisors. "I didn't realize you'd be attending in person. We're honored." I shook her hand. "I thought it would be useful to sit in today." "Absolutely," she said warmly. "You'll elevate the room just by being in it." She turned to the others in the hall. "Everyone, If you haven't had the pleasure, this is Director Emerson Vale, our liaison from the Department of Defense. She has final review authority for the Sentry integration contract. It landed like a grenade. The hallway went still. I didn't look at Logan. I didn't need to. The silence around him was the reaction. We entered the boardroom together. My nameplate was already at the front, beside Lorraine's. Water glass, notepad, agenda. Standard setup. But for me, it was something else. Proof. I took my seat, opened my folder, and waited. The team filed in one by one. Program leads, analysts, department heads, each offering nods or greetings with carefully measured deference. A few looked surprised I was so young. Some blinked at the gender mismatch. But no one asked questions once they saw the badge. Respect doesn't always need explanation. Sometimes it just needs presence. Logan and my father came in last. They took seats far from mine. They were quiet. At 0900 sharp, Lorraine opened the session. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to thank Director Vale for joining us. Her oversight has already shaped several protocol refinements. Today, she'll be reviewing implementation alignment and next phase metrics." I stood, smoothed my notes, and began. My voice didn't shake. It never did. Years of briefings had taught me how to speak with clarity, even when the air was thick with politics or pride. I outlined key requirements, cited benchmark data, and pointed to expected corrections. When Logan stood to present, his voice wavered. "We've developed a phased rollout strategy," he began, "that aligns with milestone compliance as defined by internal metrics." I let him go on. Then I raised my hand. "Mr. Vale," I said, voice even, "could you clarify how your proposed method accounts for the resilience latency in Memo 48B? He paused. I believe we accounted for that in version 4. You didn't. The simulation failed our stress test last Thursday. I'll need the revised protocol by close of business Thursday. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. For a moment, the room paused, and then moved on. But everything had changed. The rest of the meeting flowed with quiet intensity. Engineers spoke in numbers, directors referenced dashboards, and every eye in the room found its way to me at least once. Not because I demanded it, because they understood what I represented. Authority. Logan didn't speak again until the very end, and even then, it was short, stiff. My father said nothing at all. He sat with his hands folded, his pen untouched, shoulders squared like he was bracing for an impact that had already happened. When the session adjourned at 11:47 a.m., Lorraine wrapped it up with efficiency. Director Vale will remain on site through tomorrow for follow-up assessments. Please extend full access. Her continued involvement is not only welcome, it's vital. People stood, chairs scraped softly. Someone offered me coffee. Another asked if I needed a private room to review system logs. I declined both politely. By the time I closed my folder, the room had mostly cleared, except for them. My father lingered near the glass wall, one hand gripping the back of a chair like it might keep him grounded. Logan was a few paces behind him, expression unreadable, as if trying to solve an equation with variables he never imagined existed. I stood, adjusted the sleeve of my blazer, and made my way toward the door. Emerson! My father's voice stopped me. I turned, composed, neutral. We need to talk. I gave a small nod. Your office? He hesitated. Yes. I followed him down the corridor, every step echoing the weight of a conversation that had been overdue for more than a decade. Inside, the office hadn't changed much. Dark wood, framed certificates, a shelf full of leadership books no one ever actually read. But something was different now. My mother was already there, sitting stiffly in a visitor's chair. Logan stood by the window, arms crossed. They had assembled themselves like a panel. Familiar, rehearsed. I didn't sit. I stood just inside the door, hands clasped lightly behind my back. Not defensive, not aggressive, at ease. The silence stretched. How long? My father finally asked. 6 months, I said. He blinked. 6 months. You've been director for 6 months? I nodded. You didn't tell us. I did, he frowned. I sent invitations to the appointment ceremony. I continued calmly. I emailed the announcement memo. I left voicemails. My mother's brows furrowed. We never saw. I used the same contact details you gave me 5 years ago. She opened her mouth, then closed it. We didn't know what it meant, she said eventually. Director, it sounds high level, sure, but we didn't understand. You never asked. That landed heavier than anything else in the room. Logan shifted by the window. We thought you were doing field work, rotating through bases, maybe. I mean, no one said you were leading anything. I looked at him evenly. Last night you said people in the military just follow orders. You laughed when you said it. He looked down, jaw tightening. My mother touched her purse, then paused. I thought you were pushing us away. No, I said, voice calm. I just stopped hoping you'd show up. My father turned toward the desk, arms braced on the edge like he needed it for support. He didn't speak right away. When he did, his voice had lost its usual authority. So what do you want now? A headline? Public credit? An apology? I blinked slowly. I want what I've always deserved. Respect. For my work, for my choices, for the fact that I didn't fail just because I didn't follow your blueprint. Silence fell again, dense and sharp. Logan finally moved away from the window. He approached cautiously, his expression less defensive now. You could have buried me in that meeting, he said. You didn't. I wasn't there for you, I replied. I was there for the project. He nodded once. Still, you were fair and commanding. It was the first genuine compliment I'd ever heard from him. My mother looked at me with eyes that held more apology than words could carry. We should have been at your commissioning, your graduation, all of it. I didn't understand what you were building. No one did, I said. But that didn't stop me. My father exhaled, long and rough. Then he did something I never expected. He walked around the desk and extended his hand. It wasn't performative. It wasn't reluctant. It was the same kind of handshake I'd seen in every promotion ceremony, every moment of professional respect earned, not given. Director Vale, he said, voice steady but subdued. I owe you an apology. I underestimated you completely. I took his hand, firm, unflinching. I accept. He released it, and for once, didn't try to fill the air with justification. Logan sat down slowly, like the weight of realization had finally settled. You built something we don't understand, he said, almost to himself. That's on us. We assumed we knew better. Most people do, I replied. Until they don't. The tension began to thaw, not with hugs or laughter, but with something more meaningful, accountability. As I turned to leave, my mother stood up, her voice tentative. If we wanted to start again, would you let us? I paused. One step at a time, I said. No assumptions, no erasing what's already happened, just effort. She nodded quickly. Effort. We can do that. Outside the office, the hallway felt different. Not wider, not lighter, just honest. And that, for once, was enough. Later that evening, back at the guest room, I stood at the window and watched the sun lower behind the trees. My badge was tucked back in my suitcase, but the sense of weight it carried remained. This wasn't a victory in the cinematic sense. No standing ovation, no redemption arc with swelling music. It was better. It was real. The truth had finally been spoken aloud in a room where it once had no space. And I had stood in that space, not to prove anything, but to exist fully as myself. The next morning began with a soft gray sky and the slow rhythm of rain tapping the windows. I woke early, though I hadn't really slept. My mind had stayed in that office, reliving every word, every silence, every gesture that signaled a shift. I dressed in the same sharp navy suit from the day before. No uniform, no performance, just presence. At 7:45 a.m., I walked back into the executive building through the same security checkpoint. The guard who'd greeted me yesterday gave me a quick nod and a crisp, "Good morning, Director." I returned it with a quiet thank you and continued to the elevator. The day's agenda was lighter: follow-up briefings, integration walkthroughs, a cybersecurity debrief with the technical leads. I was scheduled to sit in on 3 sessions, but I knew by now that my presence alone would carry weight. After yesterday's meeting, I had gone from theory to fact in their minds. I was no longer a name at the bottom of a memo. I was the decision-maker in the room. By the time I reached the top floor, the team was already filtering into the strategy chamber. Unlike yesterday's formal presentation, today's atmosphere was more surgical: fewer people, more detail, less performance. I took my seat, opened my tablet, and scanned the system logs ahead of the first walkthrough. A young analyst approached with printed charts in hand. He looked barely out of grad school. "Director Vale," he said, slightly breathless, "we made the protocol corrections you suggested yesterday, revised latency thresholds, and revalidated through 4 rounds. I uploaded the summary to your folder." "Thank you," I said, glancing at his name badge. "Trevor, right?" He looked stunned that I'd remembered. Yes, ma'am." "Good work. I appreciate speed and accuracy. Keep going." He smiled like I'd handed him a promotion. Behind him, Logan walked in. He paused at the doorway, then made his way around the room to the open chair across from me. He looked different than yesterday. Less curated, more aware. "I read your memo again last night," he said, not quietly enough to be private. "You were right about the resilience gaps." I nodded. "I know." He took a breath like he wanted to say something else, but didn't. Instead, he opened his laptop and began pulling up his updated plan. The room filled in gradually. Department heads, system engineers, Lorraine Marsh herself. No grand entrance, no need for ceremony. She glanced at me and nodded once in greeting. "Shall we begin?" she said. And just like that, the most important technical discussion of the quarter unfolded. Logan led the first half of the session, walking us through revised architecture and impact assessment. He spoke precisely, but without the smugness he'd worn at family dinner. I could tell he'd stayed up late revising, and that, in itself, was a step forward. I asked questions, not to corner him, just to verify. "Have you validated the packet loss ratio under breach simulation?" "Yes, we reran with the adjusted firewall buffer." "Show me the output logs." He did. Next to me, Lorraine tapped her pen thoughtfully. "Your team was quick, Logan. That's commendable." He glanced at me. We had very specific feedback. By the second half of the session, I shifted focus to the next milestone: data encryption standard upgrades and external audit readiness. The lead engineer hesitated during his portion, stumbling through outdated terminology. "Director Vale," he said nervously, "our team is still transitioning from the 2048-bit key structure. The 4096 compliance requirement caught us off guard." I turned to Logan. "Why wasn't that addressed last quarter?" He cleared his throat. "Honestly, we assumed the threshold would remain discretionary." "It's not discretionary," I said. "It's federal law, and this project's exposure level mandates top-tier encryption from day one." Silence. "I'll need a written remediation plan before Monday," I added, "and I expect execution to begin immediately." "Yes, ma'am," the engineer said quickly. No one argued. No one deflected. They listened. I wasn't loud. I didn't need to be. Respect doesn't shout. It takes space, quietly and fully. When the meeting broke for coffee, I stayed seated. Lorraine remained too, reviewing notes beside me. "You've changed the tone around here," she said, not looking up. "How so?" "You speak like someone who doesn't care about being liked." I smiled faintly. "That's accurate." She finally looked at me. "It's refreshing. We deal with too many vendors who are more interested in handshakes than hard questions." "I don't do handshakes unless they're earned." Lorraine gave a satisfied nod. "This project will survive because people like you exist. People who come in without needing a podium." I tucked my pen into my folder. It's not about standing out. It's about standing firm. We finished the debrief early. By noon, the room had cleared, and I was left gathering my notes at a slow, deliberate pace. Logan approached again, alone this time. Look, he began, awkwardly rubbing the back of his neck. I know I've said some stupid things over the years, and yesterday probably wasn't fun for you. I've sat in tougher rooms, I said. He let out a dry laugh. Yeah, I bet. Then he hesitated. But I meant what I said yesterday. You didn't humiliate me. You didn't use that moment to get back at us. You just did your job. I always have. He nodded slowly. I see that now. There was a pause. Then he added, and it's kind of amazing. That part surprised me. Not because he said it, but because he meant it. We weren't friends now. We weren't suddenly siblings bonded by professional respect. But we were closer to something real, something earned. At 1:15, I returned to the guest room to pack. My flight back to D.C. was scheduled for the evening. I moved slowly, deliberately, folding each item with the kind of ritual that calms the mind. My badge went back into its padded sleeve. My notes were archived to the secure drive. My suit jacket was lint-rolled, then zipped into the garment bag. Before I zipped the suitcase, I added one last item, a framed photo of the Project Sentry team. Lorraine had handed it to me after the session ended. You'll want this for your shelf, she'd said. The picture was candid. Me, standing at the head of the table, mid-briefing, the room full of senior leads around me, listening. The caption below read, Director Emerson Vale, Strategic Oversight, Project Sentry, Q3 2025. For the first time in a long while, I wanted to keep a memory. I closed the case and stood. Back downstairs, my mother was making tea when I entered the kitchen. You heading out? She asked, her voice soft. Soon. She handed me a paper bag. Snacks for the plane. Old habit. I took it, surprisingly touched. Thanks. I've been reading about your project, she said. Defense Journal covered it last month. Your name was all over the piece. I raised an eyebrow. You read Defense Journal? She gave a sheepish smile. I've started. Small effort, but real. Before I left, my father walked me to the door. You'll let us know when you're back in town? He asked. I might. He reached for my bag, helping me load it into the car. No speech, no summary judgment, just help. As I pulled out of the driveway, I looked once in the rearview mirror. They didn't wave, but they didn't turn away either, and that, for now, was enough. The flight back to D.C. was smooth, uneventful, just the way I preferred things. I spent most of it reviewing field notes from another agency's audit, but occasionally my thoughts slipped sideways, back to that conference room, to my father's hand, to Logan's quiet admission. Not regret, not reconciliation, but recognition. It was new territory, not emotional, not dramatic, just the slow recalibration of what had once been rigid lines between us. I returned to my apartment late, the kind of late that turns the skyline soft and makes the marble floors echo under your shoes. I lived alone, in a high-rise near Foggy Bottom. Spartan furniture, clean lines, strategic lighting. Everything in this space had a reason. Nothing was sentimental, except for the bookshelf. Tucked between cyber defense textbooks and a hardbound collection of military strategy essays were a few framed items. My commissioning certificate, my commendation medal photo, and now, newly added, the Project Sentry snapshot Lorraine had handed me. I placed it beside a bronze plaque from a NATO symposium. Different chapters, same voice. I made tea and sat by the window, letting the city hum below. And that's when the email pinged. Subject, Internal Debrief. Project Sentry Oversight. From Lorraine Marsh. 2. Director Emerson Vale. Emerson, I wanted to personally thank you again for your involvement last week. Your leadership and clarity reframed the way our internal teams operate. I also thought you'd want to know that Logan formally submitted the amended latency architecture under your memo ID this morning. He credited you, by name. That kind of maturity isn't easy to come by, especially when it's earned under pressure. We're sending a signed hard copy of the final report for your records. Should be on your desk Monday. Lorraine. I read it twice. Not because I didn't believe her, but because it marked a shift I hadn't expected to arrive so soon. Logan. Giving credit. Voluntarily. I leaned back. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't closure either. It was something in between. Growth. That weekend passed quietly. I caught up on reports, had dinner with a colleague, cleaned my already spotless apartment. On Sunday afternoon, a name I hadn't seen in my inbox for over a year popped up again. Subject, coffee? From Logan Vale. Hey, I'm in DC for 2 days. Would you be open to grabbing coffee? No pressure, just thought we could catch up. I stared at the message, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for something like this. I replied with a simple, Monday, 4 p.m., black copper on M Street. No emojis, no warmth, just an open door. When I arrived, he was already there, seated at a corner table, a mug in both hands, like he wasn't sure what to do with them. He stood when he saw me. That, in itself, was new. You look exactly the same, he said. I shrugged off my coat. You don't. He laughed once. Yeah, well, the stress of getting grilled by your older sister in a government-sanctioned meeting will age you a little. I ordered black coffee, sat across from him, and waited. He didn't rush, just took a slow breath. I've been thinking about that night, and everything since. Honestly, I still don't know how we didn't know. You were doing all that, and we were blind. You didn't ask. I know, that's the part that gets me. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tic from childhood. I didn't come here to apologize again. I think we already did that. I came to ask a real question. I nodded, giving him the floor. Why'd you let it go for so long? That made me pause. Let what go? The distance, the silence, the fact that none of us were there when you got promoted, or published, or recognized. You just kept going. How? I stirred my coffee. Because I had to. Because if I'd waited for acknowledgement, I wouldn't have built anything. And because after a while, I realized I wasn't building it for you. He nodded slowly. That makes sense. Then, but did it hurt? I looked at him, not unkindly, just honestly. Of course it did. The first 5 years. Every time I mailed home an article and got nothing in return, it chipped away a little. But then I stopped measuring my value by how much space I took up in other people's frames. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, you used to write notes inside your letters, like full-on updates. I remember Mom saying you were always so formal. I was trying to be clear. I thought if I could explain it right, maybe you'd care. And when we didn't, I stopped explaining. He looked out the window. The sky was turning amber with the early winter dusk. Do you think we can rebuild this? You and me? I sipped my coffee. Maybe, but not by pretending nothing happened. Right, he said quickly. Of course. I just mean, a clean slate's too convenient. But maybe we could start with something simpler. Like what? He smiled a little. Next time I present to a boardroom, I run the encryption benchmarks by you first. I raised an eyebrow. Only if you don't roll your eyes when I make you rework it. He laughed. The real kind this time. Deal! We didn't hug. We didn't toast to forgiveness. We just sat. Two people who had once been children in the same house and were now professionals with overlapping scars. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the whole weight of history alone. The report arrived Monday morning. Heavy envelope, thick paper, embossed seal. The final draft of Project Sentry, with a notation at the top. Reviewed and approved. Director E. Vale, Final Authority, Signature, DoD, Cybersecurity Oversight. It wasn't just a document. It was a line drawn in ink. Proof that I had shaped something that would live on without my voice in the room. Later that evening, I received one more message. From Lorraine Marsh. Subject, quick note. Just got out of the quarterly board meeting. Your work came up more than once. I was asked who vetted the Sentry revisions. I said, she doesn't vet, she leads. I closed the message and set my phone aside. In the distance, the hum of the city wrapped itself around the windows again. This time it sounded like arrival. Not applause, not acceptance, just quiet certainty. The kind you don't need to prove. The kind that lives in how you carry yourself, how you walk into a room, and who speaks your name, now not as a question, but with clarity. 6 months later, I sent a simple email. Dinner, Sunday at 6, my place, bring nothing, no RSVP, no small talk. My father arrived first. He wore a dark blazer and held a thin folder. "Thought you'd want this," he said, handing over a laminated printout of the Defense Journal cover. Project Sentry, my name in bold, standing beside Lorraine Marsh and General Armstrong. "It's been framed in my office," he added. "Quiet reminder." "Thank you," I said. My mother followed with an apple pie wrapped in foil. "Still your favorite, right?" "It is." She looked around my apartment, sleek, clean, quiet. "How do you keep it so neat?" I didn't answer. Some things explain themselves. Logan and Marissa arrived a few minutes past 6. He looked more grounded than I'd seen in years. "Hope we're not too late," he said. "Traffic was not ideal." "You're fine," I replied. The dinner was calm. Conversation moved evenly. No one interrupted. No one over-explained. For the first time, it felt like I wasn't sitting on the outside of my own story. Logan spoke up over dessert. "That rollout strategy you mentioned, I used it. The team resisted, but it worked." "Did you tell them where it came from?" He smirked. "Eventually, after I enjoyed the credit for 5 minutes." I nodded. "Fair enough." Across the room, my father stood and raised his glass. "To Emerson," he said, "who reminded us that value isn't in following a path, it's in carving your own." No one clapped, but everyone raised their glasses. After they left, I stood beside the dining table, letting the silence return. It wasn't cold anymore. It was mine. They had come, not because they owed me, but because now they understood. This was my table. And they were guests, grateful to be seated.